A low, unending scream. It was not a poetic exaggeration. The surface of the Class 11 world constantly expanded and contracted in brutal temperature cycles, grinding colossal tectonic plates of bedrock against oceans of solid methane. The friction produced a sound exactly like a massive dying animal. Nothing was supposed to live down there. As a newly promoted survival instructor, Thesvon knew the statistical realities better than anyone. He had memorized the academy manuals. He understood the thermal tolerances of carbon and the brittle points of silicon. I will be honest with you. What I watched on the orbital monitors that day completely dismantled everything the academy ever taught me about the limits of biology. 55 cadets were scheduled for the extreme environmental assessment. 5 different species were dropping onto a frozen crust where sustained temperatures hovered below 200 Kelvin. The atmosphere was incredibly thin, laced with frozen pockets of toxic gas that could liquefy lungs upon inhalation. It was a death world in the truest clinical sense. The staging bay was uncomfortably cold during the pre-drop kit inspection. Thesvon walked to the line of shivering cadets with his datapad, cross-referencing their standard-issue survival gear, thermal layers, and water purification tablets. He stopped in front of the single human female in the cohort, Sigret. The automated security scanner had locked onto her pack, flashing a yellow anomaly warning. It was a worn cellulose-based square. Thesvon frowned at the physical printout. It was a photograph of several humans standing in front of tall green flora. The scanner confirmed it possessed 0 power signature, no digital encoding, and absolutely no tactical value for an extreme survival scenario. Security protocol dictated immediate confiscation of non-essential weight. When the automated guard drone reached for the object, Sigret simply pulled it back, stating it was a memory from a family camping trip. The security system, lacking a translation for recreational wilderness survival, suffered a logic fault and logged the item as an unclassified anomaly. Sigret quietly tucked the photograph back into her insulated pocket. During the final briefing, Thesvon made the mistake of standing too close to her. His species, the Thesperi, relied on a delicate photosynthetic membrane covering their upper shoulders, requiring specific gentle light spectrums to maintain basic energy efficiency. Standing near the human, his patches began to curl inward, the vibrant green darkening into a bruised purple. It was an involuntary, deeply buried biological dormancy response. His species only triggered this specific cellular retraction during extinction-level radiation events. There was no radiation in the staging bay, just the human. He closed his eyes, frantically calculating the exact millisecond his biology would force his organs into irreversible stasis if he did not step away. The complex mathematical thought was entirely derailed. Does it at least have Wi-Fi? Sigret was looking up from the grim casualty projection data pad, her expression loose and mildly inconvenienced. 2 Corvin cadets beside her laughed. A high, nervous, clicking sound. Thesvon looked at her face, and his photosynthetic patches turned pitch black. The drop pods launched 30 minutes later. Thesvon stood rigid in the orbital monitoring station, his hands locked tightly behind his back. 55 bodies slammed into the screaming ice of the Class 11 surface. Within 12 minutes, the sheer violence of the environment claimed the unprepared. 3 Corvin cadets, whose biology demanded constant synchronized physical contact, clustered into a tight panic formation as the howling sub-zero wind physically blew them apart. For Belvani cadets, creatures composed of semi-liquid cores, compressed into rigid, agonizing geometric shapes as the cold froze their internal geography solid. 6 electromagnetically sensitive Zikrith simply sat down in the frost, entirely blind. Their navigation was completely scrambled by the chaotic magnetic anomalies pulsing through the crust. 2 Pel cadets fell to their knees. The extreme cold made their naturally heat-resistant silicon armor so brittle that it cracked audibly against the wind. Sigrid's pod opened. She stepped out into the gale. She brushed a thin layer of crystallized methane off her shoulder, adjusted the collar of her jacket, and began walking. The atmosphere was punishingly thin. The remaining non-human cadets gasped, their respiratory systems failing to process the sharp, heavy air. Sigret did not panic. She adjusted her breathing rhythm within 90 seconds. She took controlled, shallow breaths entirely through her nose, forcing the sub-zero air to warm within her nasal passages before it could flash freeze her lung tissue. When a pocket of lethal gas vented violently from a fissure nearby, she tore a strip of fabric from her inner thermal layer, wet it with her own saliva, and wrapped it tightly across her lower face. It was a crude, primitive barrier. It kept her functional for 6 minutes in a zone the Academy rated as having zero survivability. The environmental hostility escalated. The surface temperature violently swung 60 degrees whenever the weak, distant sun broke through the heavy storm clouds. The alien cadets cycled rapidly and dangerously between catastrophic thermal shock and deep hypothermia. Their bodies were unable to balance the violent extremes. Sigret simply shivered. Her musculature spasmed involuntarily for exactly 4 minutes, generating intense internal friction. Then her body's aggressive vasoconstriction system fully engaged, pulling warm blood away from her exposed skin to fiercely protect her internal organs. The shivering stopped. Her core temperature stabilized flawlessly. No other species in the galactic catalog possessed an active, localized thermoregulation system with such a massive operational range. She eventually found a frozen vein of liquid laced with heavy methane compounds. It was rated lethal to 94% of known carbon-based life. She chipped away a jagged shard, held it against her own body heat until the edges began to melt, and filtered the droplets through a second torn strip of cloth. She swallowed the liquid. She wiped her mouth, muttering quietly that it tasted like well water. By the 20-minute mark, she had dragged heavy compressed ice blocks into a semicircle. Utilizing salvaged drop pod insulation to create a physical windbreak, she casually rewired a dead pod battery, sparking it to create a localized thermal core in the center of the structure. 8 alien cadets, shaking and terrified, silently dragged themselves into her makeshift dwelling within the hour. She did not comment on their presence. She just moved over, making room on the ice. A deep planetary groan echoed beneath the makeshift shelter. A seismic ice fracture suddenly ripped open 200 meters away, the sound cracking like artillery fire across the frozen plains. The 8 sheltering alien cadets began to panic. Their varied biologies screamed that the ice was about to give way beneath them and plunge them into the liquid methane sea. Sigret did not panic. She simply knelt. She pressed her bare ear directly against the freezing ground for 3 precise seconds. She stood up, pointed a thick glove toward a seemingly identical stretch of barren, wind-blasted wasteland, and ordered them to move 400 meters in that exact direction. She had accurately identified a stable foundation of solid bedrock situated beneath 6 meters of ice, and she had done it purely by listening to the acoustic vibrations of the planet itself. Later, as the artificial sun dipped below the horizon, she dug a cluster of frozen crystalline organisms from beneath the thin crust. The Academy database immediately flagged them as a severe biological hazard. She chipped one out, lifted it to her nose, smelled it, and casually took a bite. 3 of the recovering cadets immediately retched at the sight. Sigret frowned, chewing thoughtfully, and murmured that it really just needed a little bit of salt. In orbit, Thesvon could not process the telemetry. He ordered the simulation parameters pushed to absolute maximum. His monitoring officer stared blankly at the glowing screens, whispering back that they had been running at maximum capacity since the initial drop. The hostility of the environment peaked. The monitoring officer's hand hovered over the emergency extraction sequence. The thought of an inevitable catastrophic casualty fully formed in his mind as a massive ice shelf collapsed violently just 30 meters behind the human. "Yeah, that happens sometimes," Sigret noted over the open comms, continuing her steady pace without even turning around to look at the localized destruction. When the extraction finally occurred hours later, a medical response team was frantically preparing for severe trauma cases. Sigret possessed deep frostbite abrasions on both of her forearms from hauling the heavy ice blocks. She was visibly bleeding. A terrified medical officer rushed forward with an expensive, highly advanced dermal regeneration matrix to save her limbs. Sigret waved him off. She pulled a roll of gray adhesive out of her pack, ripped off a thick piece with her teeth, and slapped it directly over the bleeding wound. She told the horrified doctor to just use duct tape because it was faster. The Academy's central database finally completed its cross-referencing of the human's medical and planetary data. The information cascaded across Thesvin's primary screen, systematically obliterating every single assumption he held about biological fragility. Sigret had been bleeding from those frostbite abrasions for 3 hours before applying her crude gray adhesive. The estimated blood loss was 18% of her total circulatory volume. For 40 of the 55 species present, an 8% blood loss was a rapid, irreversible lethal threshold. Yet the database showed the human lethal threshold was an astounding 40%, meaning she was operating at less than half her biological danger zone and had simply found the bleeding slightly annoying. The Zikrith cadets had failed to navigate because the planet's magnetic field was chaotic and broken. The database revealed Earth's magnetic field was generated by a violently spinning molten iron core. Humans evolved on a planet with a literal liquid metal heart. Sigret navigated by wind direction and ground vibration because her native magnetic field was so overwhelmingly powerful. Her species never needed to develop a biological sense for it. The most absurd statistic flashed in bright red text. Earth's oceans contained approximately 20 million tons of dissolved gold, a dense, heavy metal. Humans willingly swam in it for recreation on a Class 12 Deathworld. The fundamental truth finally locked into place. Earth was a Class 12 anomaly. The frozen Deathworld below them actually scored lower on 7 of the 12 major danger metrics. Its atmospheric toxicity was rated a 6, while Earth's was a 9. Its biodiversity threat index was a 2, while Earth's was an 11. Sigret was not surviving an extreme hostile environment. She was essentially walking across a planet significantly safer than her home. The worn photograph was finally analyzed in its proper context. During the first hour of the drop, Sigret had removed the zero-energy cellulose square, looked at it for exactly 11 seconds, and carefully put it away. Immediately after that specific action, her performance metrics, including movement speed and shelter construction efficiency, had inexplicably spiked by 22%. The Academy possessed no existing classification for a physical object that artificially improved physiological performance through a completely unmeasurable mechanism. It was officially designated a psychological force multiplier. The worn photograph now rests inside the Academy's Museum of Unprecedented Events. Thesvon still refuses artificial light therapy for his darkened patches. Whenever he breathes the station's recycled air, he vividly remembers the metallic taste of the frozen planet. She had called it refreshing. He stands quietly before the glass display case, staring at the smiling humans surrounded by green trees.